All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. We have what I believe is a very timely and important topic for many of you joining us who might be beginning to think about succession, what succession ultimately looks like in your world, and you're facing an uncertain period ahead of you as you try to determine the right time to pass the torch. So, really excited for today's discussion. My name is Stephen Watts, and I'm the Chief Growth Officer here at Founders Financial. We have a slight lineup change. Some might call it an upgrade, if you were asked some. We have a special guest for today's event, standing in for our regularly scheduled host, Brad Shepard, our Chief Executive Officer. He's unfortunately out, so filling in is our President and Chief Investment Officer, Peter Murphy. So really excited for Pete to join us. Pete's been with Founders Financial since 2012 and serves as our Chief Investment Officer and drives the strategy for Founders in-house investment management platform, Freedom Capital Management Strategies. He has led it to be one of the largest TAMPs in our industry. And Pete's experience includes Pete's past experience included also guiding the endowment for Notre Dame prior to coming to Founders. And in 2001, he was named our president. So again, super happy to have Pete join us today and help us lead this discussion. In addition to driving strategy for Founders, Pete is really committed and focused on directly serving the members within the Founders community. He spends a large amount of his time working directly with our members and advisors to help guide their practices so they can achieve the dreams that they have for it. This includes, which is really irrelevant for our topic today, working closely with those who are entering the succession chapter of their careers. So, Pete, welcome. And I think we're going to have a good discussion today.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Steve, and looking forward to it.
So, Pete, succession is a subject that when you and I talk to advisors, we often hear this come up, right? Everyone's kind of worried about it. They're thinking about it to some degree, some more than others. But it's especially true when they reach a certain stage of their career. You know, the retrospective of how an advisor came to be a financial advisor and why they ultimately chose the path they did, it's unique to everyone we talk to. However, there are some common threads, and one is happenstance. Happenstance played a big role, right? Maybe it made sense at the time. Maybe they knew someone in the same profession that gave them their first job. There's no shortage of reasons why someone entered this career path in the first place. You can roll circumstance into that as well. All those things combined led them to where they are today. And it's amazing how many advisors that we've spoken to say that being an advisor wasn't their first career path, right? They had other things in mind, but they kind of fell into this. I point all this out because it could suggest, and it's kind of the point of today's discussion, it could suggest that some advisors who never intended to be financial advisors ultimately became great ones, but maybe never intended to be that. They may have never actually, what we often refer to as, they fell in love with their business, right? It was a starting job that later became a career and so on. Now, some did fall in love with it and they continue to love it to this day, which is awesome. Others may have loved it, but then maybe fell out of love with it for one reason or another. And now they're considering moving on. So to get things started, I'm going to tee the discussion up with like this. Why is the topic of succession and the need for advisors to identify their love and passion for the business, why is that so important uniquely in today's environment?
Yeah, it's a great question, Steve, and it's one that will face every single advisor at some point. And that point in the future can be determined by them. It could be determined by circumstance unexpectedly, but succession is an inevitability, and the circumstances around it is what is outside the advisor's control, typically speaking. And preparing for succession as a business owner of an independent wealth management practice is one of the most important things that you can do to protect your legacy, to protect the relationships that you serve, and then to carry that legacy forward. And it's so similar to the financial planning process that each of you engage with in your client relationships. And you all know, whether it gets to the estate planning point or the retirement planning point, that decision has a feeling of finality to it. And human nature is to put that decision off. whether it's determining when to retire, whether it's determining the estate plan and those decisions around it, because as humans, our instinct is to avoid thinking about that end because we likely enjoy where things are today. But whether we want to or not, as planners, that those are very important things to put in place from a risk management perspective for you, for your family, for your enterprise. It's the same exact thing in succession planning. It's just through a different lens and through a different context. And many of you likely even consult small business owners on this very thing as it relates to succession for their business. But it's just hard to turn inward, especially when it's something that you do day in and day out. And to turn inward and focus that same conversation on yourself, actually, I believe is harder when you're doing it to serve others day in and day out. But it is the most important thing in the context of legacy. And putting a plan in place can not only afford you peace of mind, it can also afford those you serve peace of mind, and it can have infinite reward from focusing on that decision today, even if the time may be in the future. And we're going to get into this later, but when is the right time? The time is now, no matter when it may be. The time is now to begin preparing for succession. And whether you're ready to retire inevitably in the next year or two, or you're 30 years out, you need to begin planning for what you may want succession to look like today. And no different than the financial plans that you build with your relationships, they're living plans. You will have a living succession plan for your enterprise that will evolve over time. But if you don't think about it, if you're not intentional about it now, it will not happen. It will happen to you, and it will not happen likely in the way that you would have liked it to. And you are in control of planning for that and making it an active planning process for succession. So no matter where you are in the life cycle of your wealth management enterprise, the time is now to begin considering what you want succession to look like and to begin laying the groundwork for preparing for that succession.
Yeah, it's likely that question has popped in their mind to some degree or another. Just where are they at right now, right? And how prevalent, how real is that question in their lives, and what promises at play in their focus. So I'll tee this next thing up for you. Can you imagine, Pete, what people will say about you when it comes down to succession?
Yeah, one of the questions we'll often ask when we're engaging with advisors around succession planning, and it can often be an emotional topic for many as they've spent a lifetime or a career building this practice and this legacy, and trying to think about handing it off is an emotional topic, and rightfully so. And one of the examples we'll often raise, or the questions we'll often ask, is, can you imagine when you've moved on from this world into the next, and everybody that you've family, friends, many of your client relationships likely are standing there at your celebration of life after you passed on. What are they going to be focused on, and what's going to be most important to them? And we phrase that not in a fearful type of context, but what do you want people to say about you? And what do you think is most important? And for most of you, you're going to say that they trusted you and you served them well, and they did well by you, and you're someone that they were honored to have a relationship with. And in the context of succession, you want to make sure that they feel that beyond you too. And that's how you begin thinking about this. Oftentimes, succession planning is focused on a very transactional nature in terms of the value of the practice and the transition of the book and those things. And those are mechanics that have to happen. But what's the spirit of succession that you're taking, and what's the legacy that you want to leave in that through that spirit? And that's what we're talking about here is the most important thing. And if you think about at a celebration of life, after you passed on, what's likely going to be the topic? It's going to be about those things. It's the little things you did to impact them by sharing your heart with them, sharing trust together, and the relationship you built over a course of a lifetime. And that's how the succession planning conversation should be considered in our mind as well.
Yeah, it's such a, again, I'll reference back to all the advisors every chance to talk to, the protection of legacy and the protection of the client relations that they developed over generations in many cases. I mean, that is true to the heart of many advisors, if not all advisors, right? So yeah, the mechanics you've spoken of around the valuation, maximizing the return, all really important stuff for the advisor, but protecting that legacy and making sure it's in a good spot when you leave it is something that can't be overstated for sure. So Pete, let's dig into what advisors here today, or why advisors are here today, right? Many advisors find themselves in this interesting place in their lives. They're a little bit older. They're like me, a little grayer, and certainly wiser. Hopefully, they've achieved some level of success. The idea of in question of falling in love with the business, it's such an interesting way to think about the relationship the advisor has to their craft, right? It feels very vulnerable to answer if you really try to answer it honestly. So how important is it for advisors to really stop for a moment, just stop and settle and ask themselves this question in a really honest, reflective way?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things around this question. So if we go back to the beginning, is it time? And we went through the conversation there. It's of course it's time to begin thinking and considering. But when we really break this down and we talk to advisors about, are they ready for succession? Are they ready to put that plan into action? The first thing that we start with is what's your heart on the matter? And where is your heart right now in the context of your practice, your business, your enterprise? And that is where it all starts. And so passion fuels an independent wealth management practice above and beyond all else. So if you talk to your relationships and you were to go take a survey of them and say, what do they value most about the impact you've made in their life? I doubt many are going to respond that you're a really good asset allocator, you run portfolios really well, you build really beautiful financial plans, you do awesome rebalancing. That's just not what they appreciate most. They're going to say, I appreciate that I trust this person. I appreciate that he's got my best interest at heart, that he showed me a path to something I didn't think was achievable, and he's helped me buy into that vision and buy into myself. And that all is fueled by passion. That's all fueled from within. And oftentimes, advisor will reach this point, they've been at this now for 20, 30, 40 plus years, and that passion begins to wane. And when that passion begins to wane, it's likely a sign that it's time to take a fresh look at things. And that fresh look could be a re-energizing focus on the business and getting in touch with that passion that started it all. Or it may be, you know what? I've run my course here. It is time for me to put this succession plan into action because my passions are beginning to lie elsewhere and where I want to focus and dedicate my time. So it really starts with that passion and identifying where it is. And a lot of time it harkens back to where you started and some of the energy and fulfillment you got from that moment. Because after you've done something for a long period of time, you can fall into going through the motions, and then as we'll talk about later, then there's as you grow, complexity comes, and some of the shininess loses its luster, and all of those things. But it all comes back down to your passion and how you're feeling about what you're doing day in and day out.
Yeah, that passion is essential to everything, right? Once that starts to wane, it's a domino effect from there, it sounds like. So Pete, I love this quote from Steve Jobs, and I'm sure many people have read it or heard it before, but it's such an honest and realistic understanding of our lives and the role our work plays in it. Jobs goes on to say, your work is going to fill a large portion of your life. And the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is ultimately great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. So I throw this quote into the discussion today because I'd love to get your thoughts on how this concept applies to advisors, given all the things they have to deal with that might make loving the business more difficult. And you mentioned complexity earlier and some other things. So curious what your thought is on that.
Yeah, and this is a really powerful quote. And so what it speaks to is, if you really dig into it, it speaks to internal versus external validation or measurement. So how do you define great work? And if you're going to define great work by your assets under management, by the number of relationships that you serve, by the number of designations that are listed after your name, those are all external points of validation. And while they may be points of professional credibility, they're not what is going to bring you joy and satisfaction. And there's an endless pursuit for those measures. And it's ultimately unfulfilling if that's all you're in it for and all you're focused on. And so the whole point about this is it starts with loving what you do. It starts with the passion and what really gives you fulfillment. And then from that, great work is performed as measured by you. And it all starts with you, and it starts with self. And one of the things that we really focus on at Founders is our strategic enterprise program, which is all focused around the leadership journey and the focus of leadership through growth of self first. And that's what this is speaking to. And it matters so much in this context of, is it time for succession? Is it time to get re-engaged and fall in love? Go back to, are you loving what you're doing and why? And then the answer becomes very, very clear and apparent quickly.
Yeah, great thoughts, Pete. So we're working down this in this discussion. We're working down this kind of line of, do I fall in love with the business again, or maybe even for the first time? Do I look for my exit strategy to move on and leave my practice in a good legacy? One of the things that pops up, for advisors, they're kind of thinking which route to go is complexity, right? Complexity, and you mentioned it earlier. Complexity is a challenge for many, if not all, financial advisors to some degree or another. It's both a natural as businesses evolve, and it's a roadblock to future growth opportunity, including how it impacts succession. So what I'm curious about is the role complexity plays and how advisors feel about their business over time. Again, go back to that passion kind of phrase you're using earlier, right? Does complexity start to erode that passion, right? What impact does their decision and time frame to move on, how's complexity kind of weigh into that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and in our world, we're primarily interacting with independent advisors, and so their journeys oftentimes share a lot of similar milestones and markers. So many advisors who either become independent or start independent, they do it primarily because they want to get more focused on serving their client relationships in the best way possible with the most flexibility and control. And so, what they love, most advisors get into this business because they love engaging with and serving people. That is what fuels them. And then what happens is, as they start to see success from the fruits of their labor, they serve people really well. And then the people they're serving tell others about their great service. And so their practice or their enterprise begins to grow. And as they're serving more relationships, there's more complexity, there's more to do. And many often start as a one person shop, and maybe they have a professional administrator serving alongside them. But eventually it gets more complex, and they need to think about more hires, more people, more systems, more processes. And what started as a very simple practice focused on the majority of your time and energy doing what you love quickly has evolved into a meaningful small business that has a lot more responsibility, where you're wearing more CEO hats and you're not just sitting in the advisor seat, which means you're seeing less and less of your time focused on that relationship growth, relationship development, and a lot more of your time running a business. And that's where these ceilings of complexity start to come in. And we see it consistently with advisors who grow frustrated. They love independence, they love the fruits of independence, but they really didn't get into it thinking about running a business, and certainly running a business with a degree of complexity that we see today in the wealth management industry, which is more focused on comprehensive planning and very deep and rich client engagement. It has become a more complex, not a less complex business over time. And so that's one of the frustration points that many reach. And this topic of succession will often come up at this point, because anytime in life where you hit these milestone points or these crossover points, you kind of have a two paths you can choose. You can either kind of say, all right, you know what, I'm going to shrink down or stay where I am and kind of slow growth so I can stay simple, or I do want to keep growing, but that requires me to make investment. I've never done something like this before, and I don't know that I want to spend all my time running a business. And how do you make the right decision at that fork in the road? And oftentimes succession planning becomes topic number one in the context of that, because you're thinking through not just this next transition, but where you ultimately want to be. So all of that comes into context, and you can see this in this little graphic here, right? When you start as a solo practitioner, serving a relatively small number of households, your world is very advisor centric. You're just providing advice. Your practice is simple. You don't have a whole lot of people that you're overseeing on your team, and the world is simple. Then you want to extend out in terms of the services you provide your client relationships. So you add complexity to do that because your clients need you more. And that may be introducing different types of services, more comprehensive services, bringing in outside partners that you work with and taxes and estate planning, but whatever it may be, it just becomes a more client-centric, but also more complex world. And then as your business grows even more, you got to get more process centric because you can't just remember what you're going to do day in and day out because you have so many things going on with so many moving parts that you need to have processes in your business, and you become beholden to those processes so that you can continue to deliver the service you've always been accustomed to delivering to your relationships. So advisors go through these iterations and the complexity ratchets up with each one. And for some, it's energizing and a source of fulfillment. For others, it's frustrating and a source of, do I really want to do it this way anymore? And maybe it's time to start that succession process.
Yeah, and there's that fork in the road, right? So, all right. So I think this first part of the discussion we've just had has been a kind of a great kind of background setup in terms of the state of state of affairs for advisors and setting up this proverbial fork in the road that we've been kind of mentioning. So let's kind of dig into where the options are and where advisors can think about going. So, Pete, I'm reminded of this phrase that we often hear about professional athletes, right? You'll hear football players say that, once you start thinking about retirement, right, it's probably time to hang up the pads, right? Hang up the cleats, right? So, but that can't always apply to advisors or heck, even other people in different industries. You may have situations where you're not financially ready, right? Maybe you have a succession strategy, but it's not ready to be executed yet, even though you might be feeling the weight of all those things you just mentioned, right? And there could be a number of other reasons that say, what, I'm just not ready yet. So if you are where you are and succession is not in the immediate short term, how do you rekindle the magic for the business, right? Or start that magic up again for the first time and regain the excitement for running and operating and growing the business that you may have had when you first started it?
Yeah, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, in the context of, is it time, and are you ready to change your role in the enterprise and the practice and start working towards a succession destination, or are you ready to get re-engaged and re-energized like you were when you started this place? And there really should be no middle ground. If you find yourself in the state of just going through the motions and feeling like the business is dragging you along, then as Steve said with the analogy around football players or athletes, it's a similar thing. There's writing on the wall, and you need to start asking yourself. And it starts with reconnecting with your why. I spoke about this earlier, but what do you love about what you do? And are you still loving what you do today? Maybe you loved it 30 years ago, but are you still loving it? And how do you get re-inspired if you're not? And so you start there. The answer may be no, you can't get reconnected to your why and get re-inspired, which has answered the question for you. But if you can, the first step is get re-inspired, get reconnected to your passion, and get re-energized about what you're doing and why you're doing it. If you start there, the answer will become pretty clear, but it's got to start there and always start there. And it's not just a one-time thing. This is an ongoing, continual process.
Exactly right. And we have something on the screen right now. It says, write down 5 client success stories that remind you of your impact. And I think that's such a great kind of tool or thing to do as you kind of work through this first step one of reconnecting with your why, because it's the reason you would stay is likely not financial, right? It's not like I want to make more money, right? It's because you're connected with your clients, relationships, right? You're connected with the people you serve, you're connected with your team, right? So write down those things, that can inspire you to keep going if that's the route that you either have to go where you want to go. Those things are all just great mechanisms to kind of recenter the thought of where you are and ultimately where you want to go.
Yeah, and so when you start with that and you get re-energized with your why, And through that energy, it fuels the next question is, where do I need to invest? Because this drives directly to the point around complexity that I spoke about a little bit ago. As your enterprise grows and becomes more of a multifaceted business with multiple stakeholders and all these moving parts and pieces, you need to make investments. And if you're at the point as a business owner where you don't want to invest in the business anymore, if your business is not growing, it's going to be decaying, whether you want it to or not. And this concept of cruise control is it's just a facade that things are going to stay the same when change is inevitable. And if you don't adapt and invest, you're inevitably going to decay. And so if you're re-energized with your why, it should be a catalyst for you to revisit, where do you need to invest? And I don't just mean that you need to invest tons of money and capital into your practice. It's about, what do you need to invest in so that you can then get refueled with that passion and energy to do what you love. And for many advisors, that's about taking off some of the hats that they're wearing as business owners because they're just tired of all the time that it takes to run the business, and investing in resources, whether it's other stakeholders on their team that they bring on, or outsourcing certain things so that they can focus on what they love again. And if you can do that and make those investments and consider them fully, you have the opportunity to create infinite reward from what you're focused on with your practice. And it doesn't necessarily require huge investment of dollars. It requires thoughtful and intentional investment in the practice for continued growth, and not just growth in assets and client relationships and the like, that's part of it, but the growth of your practice and the ultimate impact that you're able to deliver. And that's the only way to ascend through these ceilings of complexity that you're going to hit along the way. It starts with your why and getting re-energized on what's most important to you. And then the next thing you got to do is, where do you need to invest your time, your energy, your resources to make sure your practice represents that why, and that you're continuing on that path that you started on a long time ago, and you just keep that fuel for your business going, because without that spark, without that fuel, decay is inevitable.
Yeah, maybe we should reword this slide a little bit. Should be invest in you and the business, right? You being first, right? And then, how that ultimately, goes downstream into the business.
Absolutely. Well said. And then the last point is, it's something that, and this gets to what Steve was just saying, it's everything in what we do starts and ends with leadership. And it starts and ends with leadership of self first. And so we're in the business, in this wealth management industry, of impacting people, of serving people. And the way that that is done most effectively is through authentic leadership. And you've likely known about this, and you're likely a great leader already because you've got natural tendency and skills in this area. But no different than needing to invest in the business, you need to invest in your growth as a leader. It starts with why. We talked about that earlier. It's then about getting focused on investments in your practice and the like, to get that representation of the why to what you want it to be today. But you've got to continue investing in yourself and growth as a leader. And so we talk a lot about founders around the principles of servant leadership. And that is kind of a common cause across our community, and a set of guiding principles. And I encourage you, for your practice, if you don't have a set of guiding principles, it's a great thing to write down. It gives you something powerful to speak with your relationships about. It can connect you back to your why, that can be represented through a mission statement, which is really foundational to represent your why, not just for you, but also the stakeholders on your team and the relationships that you serve. And if you focus on continuing to grow yourself as a leader, it will fuel that passion, it will fuel that investment in the business, and it will keep that true north, that guiding light ahead of you, so that you are the leader that your enterprise needs, that your relationships need, that the stakeholders on your team need. And that fuel, it starts with you. And it's really, really important, if you're going to continue on this journey and say it's not yet time to pass the torch or to step aside, continue growing as an authentic leader is critically important to continue this journey.
Yeah, well said, Pete. All right, now let's take the flip side, right? So we've now talked about the ways you can get re-engaged and rekindle that love and magic, right? If that's the path you're going to go down. But let's take the other angle now, right? So if you've come to the decision, you're that football player who's thinking about retirement, and you say, "Yep, it's time to go on," right? It's you know it's time, and you just know. So what should advisors be aware of in their own attitudes, their feelings, their emotions, kind of recognition of what's happening around them that might signal to them, you know what, it is time to pass the torch. Let's start down that road and process.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to consider, but I'll go back to what we talked about a few moments ago. If you reassess your why and where you are, your why today may be different than your why was 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago and when you first got into this business. And if you start with that why exercise, it's going to answer a lot of these questions for you. And while the metaphor to an athlete it's an interesting one, it's not necessarily perfectly applicable in this world because, as you know, as long as you're in good health and good mental health here, you can serve client relationships for a long time. And some advisors, that's exactly what they want to do because it is their passion. It is what they love to do. And so there's not a natural biological clock like there is for many athletes that you hit a certain age that you just see a significant degradation in your abilities relative to everybody else. And in the advice space, many times it's different because the more experience you have, the better you get, and that can continue to grow. So in this world, it's less about a certain age. It's less about you've hit this point where you can't grow anymore, get any better, and the competition's passing you by. It's more about the spark, and it's more about, are you still loving this? And so you'll see here, is your passion beginning to wane? We've talked about that a lot. Are you feeling overwhelmed by complexity and you just can't even consider making investments at this point because you're just burnt out? And are you losing that luster from the next new relationship and you're almost saying, I've got enough. I don't want any more. The next one's just adding more complexity. I don't have enough time as it is. And you're just feeling overwhelmed all the time. And so if you're starting to feel these things and you're at a point where you're not really willing to make the investments to change or just to make the changes that you need to make, it's a pretty clear sign that it's time to do something about it. And that something could be it could be one of many things. It could be a sale of the practice. It could be bringing on a younger advisor and getting them prepared to take over if you haven't done so already. It could be tucking into another practice for a period of time. So you have all sorts of options, but you're going to know if it's time by going through that assessment of refocusing on your why. And if you're coming to these answers as opposed to, yeah, I'm feeling energized, I want to do this, and here's what I'm going to change, and here's how I'm going to grow, it's probably time. And only you are going to know that answer.
Yeah, I'll go on a quick tangent here. I think it's succession, the process of going through succession in itself can be re-energizing, right? I'll latch on to something you just said there about bringing someone onto your practice like an apprentice, right? So mentorship and bringing someone in to help, carry on the legacy you've created, that can spur on a lot of passion for the remaining years as you get the business up to speed to be passed on, right? So, just because you've made the decision for succession, there still might be some great years ahead of you that's full of excitement and fulfillment as you get the business ready for the next life without you. So you were talking about that and it stuck out to me. I was like, that's something that I think people just call succession isn't necessarily the end. It's the start of a new beginning. And that beginning is setting up for the next chapter, which is a really fun, cool thing to think about.
Amen. Well said.
Okay, so you've made that decision. Enough of these bullet points. If they were boxes, you've checked all or some of these, and you're gonna move on to the next chapter of your life. Pete, what can you recommend to the audience listening as the right steps and things that they need to be aware of as they now move forward with building a succession plan for the future?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is start with your destination and what you want succession to be. So don't get yourself overwhelmed with what's my business worth? Who am I going to sell it? Who am I going to transition it to? Like if you start with all those details, you're going to quickly get overwhelmed, and it's not going to be a fulfilling and fruitful process for you. This is not just another transaction. This is you preparing for your legacy and the legacy of the enterprise you've built over many decades in most cases. And so start with the destination in mind. What do you want succession to look like for you, for your relationships, and for the enterprise that you've created? Once you have that end in mind, then the rest of these pieces are just the steps that you need to take to get there. And we partner with a lot of advisors who are going through this very thing, and we always start with the end in mind, whether it's the why, the matters of importance, whatever they may be. So what are you preparing for in succession? And if the only answer is I want to sell my practice, you're not really preparing for much. That's just a transaction. So there is no legacy consideration in that. It's just a financial transaction. And that's something that's pretty simple because there is no legacy at that point if it's just a transaction and a sale and you move on. And if that's all you want, that's pretty simple and straightforward. But in the context of our view of succession planning, it starts with legacy. It starts with a destination in mind. And the process may entail a sale to an external partner, but there's a lot of avenues for succession. It could involve partnering with another firm that then takes over for you over time. It could bring up this next generation and the like. So start with your destination in mind first, and then find someone with experience in this area who can guide and partner with you through this process. And that's going to touch on all the things that you have to do, that most people start with valuation and finding the successor, and is my practice ready, and how am I going to transition my clients, who's going to come and who's not going to come. Those are all the details. You need to start with the destination. You need to build a vision around it. And then that vision drives everything that you're going to do along the way. And if you do it that way, you have very little risk of client attrition. You have very little risk of not being successful because you actually have a goal and a destination in mind, and you build a vision and strategy to accomplish it. No different than you do when you're planning with your relationships for retirement and estate planning. It's the exact same mindset around your succession plan for your practice. You got to start with those elements first, and then you put the tools and tactics into place to execute on it.
Yeah, Pete, you took the words out of my mouth. I was going to mention the parallels between what they do as a financial advisor and planner to their own kind of planning strategy around succession. So, Pete, regardless of the path that anyone listening will ultimately take in the short term, whether they're going to rekindle that magic or they're going to go down the checklist right here and start that succession process, can you share some thoughts on how you specifically and the team at Founders, how we have helped our members find peace in the decision and the help they need?
Yeah, absolutely. So it all starts with our strategic enterprise program, which is the way that we engage with our member partners and guide them through growth as servant leaders. So that's where it all starts. And that's through that comes a mission statement, comes guiding principles and value proposition, comes rituals of self-order to focus on their growth as a leader, to stay true to their why and their passion through the ups and downs of life. And so it starts there. And so we've built a program around helping them engage in that. This is a lifelong journey of growth as a leader. And through that, the succession plan is just part and parcel of it. No different than every financial plan. You talk about the plan for the estate and what happens at the end. It's no different here. And that's why I said earlier, when's the time? The time is now. Whether you're 30 years old or you're 70 years old, thinking about this and having a vision towards this is important, and it will evolve over time. But if you have a plan at the ready, you'll then know through your process of discernment when it's time to begin the execution of that plan, and you'll be well prepared to act on it, no different than your client relationships are in the context of their personal financial plan. So that's how we primarily help, and we engage with you through our strategic enterprise program to guide you along the way. And we have all the resources that you can imagine you would need, from valuation resources to support and growing and training next generation advisors through an apprenticeship institute, through solutions for monetizing your practice within Founders. So we have all of the tools that you need, but again, those are just the tools. It starts with the process of you as a leader defining your why, which will answer most of those questions. and then we'll guide and partner with you through our strategic enterprise program to achieve that outcome. And you'll lead the process, and we'll just be an instrument to you along the way. And that's the type of relationship and partnership we have with the member partners we serve of founders. And we've been doing this now for over 30 years. And the track record is very strong. Many of our member partners have been here for multiple decades at this point. And a big reason is the relationship we share with them. No different than the relationship that you share with your clients. They feel the same way about the relationship we share with them as member partners or founders.
Yeah, so some next steps. Think about the self-assessment questions for passion and succession that Pete mentioned and detailed earlier. If you have questions about founders and how we approach succession with our members, we have lots of information on our website, including our approach to apprenticeship, through our apprenticeship program, M&A, and all the options that we help advisors with. You can certainly reach out to us and connect with us for additional resources and information. We're always happy to have discussions around this. And then obviously think about things you talked about in this webinar around falling in love again or preparing for the future. All that stuff we talked about here is going to get you set up to go down the right path and get you thinking about succession in maybe a clearer way than you were before. All right, Pete, before we kind of wrap things up, I'm going to turn it over to you one last time to have you share any kind of closing thoughts, any tips, any guidance, inspiration for advisors who have either made their choice or may still be struggling and looking for guidance. So take us home and wrap us up with some good final thoughts.
Yeah, I'll start with thank you for investing the time to join us today. This is not an easy decision because there's a feeling of finality to this decision, but it doesn't need to be that way. This is an opportunity, and recast in that light, it is about what is the legacy that you want to leave, and what is the continuity of care you want to deliver to the community of relationships you serve. If you keep focused on those things, the rest will take care of itself, whether it's the valuation, whether it's the path to succession. Those details will resolve themselves if you focus on those two things, which are the most important at the beginning, the why around legacy and continuity of care. So stay true to that. Let that guide and inspire you, and find a partner to help and guide you along the way. We'd be honored to do so. And from there, just let time play out, and it'll become clear to you when the time for you is to begin acting and executing on that plan.
Awesome. Pete, great job and great discussion today. Again, thank you so much for filling in for Brad. I know he wishes he could have been here, but we're very fortunate to have you and all of your wisdom and incredible thoughts on this really important topic that is undoubtedly on the mind of so many advisors today. So, and to the audience, thank you so much, Pete. And to the audience, I thank everyone for joining us and for watching us today. And if you'd like to continue the conversation with Pete or even Brad, we're putting both of them on the road. They're going to be visiting a number of different cities in the coming months, meeting with advisors on this topic and a lot more. Brad's next stop will actually be in New England next week. So if you're in that area and you'd like to reserve some time with Brad, there's a QR code right on the screen. Please go ahead and scan that, and that'll take you to a screen where you can follow steps and book your private appointment directly with Brad. So really great conversations with Brad and Pete via webinar in this format, but you get a chance to chat with them in person and really dig into the details. It takes it to a whole nother level. So for Pete, you're going to be meeting with members and advisors in Southern Ohio and Indiana areas in the first part of June. So I know they're excited to see you out there. And again, if you're in those areas and would like to continue chatting with Pete more, please go ahead and scan the QR code for Pete that's on your screen right now. Again, he's going to be there between June 10th and June 11th, and he'd love to spend some time directly with you. And last but certainly not least, we're going to have another webinar coming up in June. This was going to feature our Chief Executive Officer, Brad Shepard, as he digs into really a nice continuation of this topic. Dig into the differences between M&A and developing an apprentice and what that looks like. This is going to be a really great discussion that digs into those two options and what might be the best route for advisors to think about and ultimately go forward with. You can register for that webinar using the link that's on your screen, or stay tuned in to some of the communications that will follow in the coming weeks. We'll give you all the instruction on how to register and join us for that discussion in early June. In the meantime, thank you all so much for coming and for listening. Have a great rest of your week, and we look forward to seeing and talking to you again here soon. Bye.
Take care, everybody.